also to give you a good idea as to why localization is important. And I think that screen that you see now, which is my first screen, basically gives you a sense as to what it means to every entrepreneur when you buy from them. The minute you walk through the doors of any business and you buy whatever it is that they're offering, you have helped contribute to them staying open. You have helped contribute to them retaining the jobs that they would have created. And so you can see the big smile on the entrepreneur's face. She's happy that you're buying from her, and she even thanks you for buying local. And that's what it means. That's why Palisov can exist. The country battles three main challenges, and Happy touched on these. Unemployment, highest level of unemployment even before we got into the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, my slide should be saying unemployment numbers in quarter 2, because those are the numbers that came out about a week ago, but updated these numbers on Friday. And so the unemployment rate is currently standing at 33.9, slight increase from the 34.5 that we had in the quarter before, with 8 million people who are actively looking for work, still not able to find any form of employment. There's about 3.6 million additional people who are discouraged from seeking work opportunities. And so if you take the expanded definition of unemployment, which includes those who have stopped looking for work, you're looking at about 11.6 million of our people who are unemployed. And this is in a country with a population estimated at about 58, 59 million people, with the youth bearing the brunt, also women. So youth unemployment in excess of 60% and women unemployment in excess of 50%. I have a quick case study for you that demonstrates the importance of localization and what harm can occur when we don't buy local. Furniture industry is my case study for today. 1999, about 3,500 factories that used to manufacture furniture for us. Currently, only 1,100, just over 1,000 factories, and that is within a period of 20 years. All of that capacity was lost. And some of the specialists who are going to talk after me will tell you that once you have lost that capacity, once that factory closes down, the likelihood of getting it back online and recovering its capability is very minimal. And so what it then does is that it means that jobs are lost, direct and indirect jobs. And in terms of direct jobs, you will see that the industry had 50,000 direct employees in 1999, 2000, 20 years later, about half of those jobs were lost. And those are just the direct jobs. And then there are a lot of indirect jobs. We talk about what we call the multiplier effect, which is the impact of economic activity in one industry, which impacts on other industries. And so if you look at the furniture industry, in order to manufacture furniture, you need raw materials and components, and these come from the plastics industry, which provides synthetic fibers, which are converted into textile items. Natural fibers and hides and skins come from the agricultural industry. Metal industry contributes metal parts. Some of those that come from the plastics industry and the agricultural industry are converted into textiles and leather items, so that industry also then benefits. Sawmills and board mills come from the forestry industry. If you look at the chemical sector, it provides you with paints and adhesives, and there are then also those other industries that like packaging, the design that comes from the creative industry, the packaging that comes from the pulp and plastics sector. So there are many industries that contribute raw materials and components into the furniture industry. So as a result of us choosing to import most of our furniture, we lost all of those jobs, the direct jobs as well as indirect jobs that are impacted on in all of these industries that I've sort of demonstrated to you in the past minute. And so it's important that next time you make a purchasing decision, don't just look at the item as a furniture item, but look at it as a furniture item that contributes jobs to all of these industries that you see on screen. The multiplier effect is quite extensive when it comes to looking at value chains that are involved directly or indirectly in the manufacturing of any item in the country. And that is just for one subsector. It applies also at a macro level. When you look at manufacturing at a macro level, every single industry in manufacturing is most of them are labor intensive, and so they also have value chains that are also extensive and create a lot of much needed new job opportunities. And this phenomenon then of buying local is not unique to South Africa. We're not the only ones that are talking localization and urging those who make purchasing decisions to buy locally. It happens all over the world. It exists for countries, for regions, and even for towns. And most of the developed countries have localization campaigns dating back to decades ago. And the one case study that I want to showcase today is the United States. The United States has an act known as the Buy American Act, which was enacted in 1933. So you can see how far back buying local has been important to the Americans. In 1982, they followed that up with the Buy America Act, and they continue improving it. And in 2017, they issued the Buy America Improvement Act. Even the current president, when he came into office, within the first week of coming into office, he already signed into law executive orders to strengthen the Buy American provisions. And so, if developed economies like that can do it, and it's tried and tested, and it's worked for them, who are we not to follow suit when we are sitting with 8 million people who are actively looking for jobs and can't find jobs? And so localization is important because it helps those entrepreneurs, another image of entrepreneurs who are opening their business, and you can see the big smiles tell you that they're looking forward to you working in, to customers working in and buying from them and taking up whatever offering they have by way of products and services. And so when we buy from them, their business stays open, they can retain the jobs that they've created. And if we continue buying from them, they can then create much needed new job opportunities, because then in order to meet demand, they might need to increase their workforce, increase their production capacity, and households will benefit. If you are unemployed, you don't have any skills. If you're sitting at home, you are not generating any income, but more importantly, you are not acquiring any skills if you're just sitting at home, even if you're qualified. The best way to acquire skills is to get employed. And so entrepreneurs like this, when they then are in a position to can employ more people, and they absorb young people into jobs, new workforces, those people acquire skills, and they can then utilize those skills to go and better their lives. But most importantly, they can even utilize those skills to start their own businesses. One of my latest slides shows you the importance of entrepreneurship in creating jobs in developed economies, of the importance of SMMEs, the contribution that they make to the development of the economy. If you want to drive empowerment in the country, you will need to ensure that those new entrants who come in, who are empowered entities, will know that someone will buy from them. And that is where Private South African comes in that we drive access to market opportunities for the betterment of businesses owned by those who are coming in without necessarily knowing who is going to buy from them, and if they will get support from companies who have traditional suppliers. And so our mandate is quite clear. We need to influence the buying that is done by every single sector of society for the benefit of the economy. We have 4 focus areas. We focus on buying that happens in the public sector. And like I said earlier on, my colleague Catherine Matiza will talk about what the public sector is doing. We then provide support by way of education, related programs to educate purchasing decision makers and purchasing officials and SCM and procurement officials in government on the importance of buying local, as well as the regulation that exists. But I will not necessarily go into it because I know Catherine will talk about it. We also then look at the buying that happens in the private sector, hence the partnership we have with BUSA, with BLSA, with BBC, and the friendship that we have over time developed with Virgilio, who is driving localization at BUSA. We have a lot of programs that I'll touch on later that talk to how we are assisting the private sector with ensuring that the cumulative buying that happens in the private sector supports jobs and supports the various value chains that are involved in each of those sectors. We educate the masses, the general public, on the importance of buying local. Consumers need to be educated on the economic impact of their purchasing decisions. Consumers need to know that if you buy a product that comes from China, I'll pick on China this morning. If you buy a product that comes from China, if you go back to my case study on furniture, when you continue buying furniture from outside of South Africa, you are taking away jobs. More than half of the workforce we had lost. More than 2/3 of the production capacity that we had for that industry has been lost. And that is what we need to educate consumers, that their purchasing decisions impact them, because we all know someone is unemployed, and a lot of those people who've lost their jobs, can attribute, the loss of those jobs pre-COVID, before COVID, to imports that continue to harm some of our industries that are labor intensive, and we're able to absorb a lot of the jobs that we want as an economy. We also have a responsibility as part of South Africa to promote accessibility of locally made products and services, and anyone who wants to buy local needs to know where to find these products, and that is what we provide as Policy of Can. Every time you come across a product that carries the Policy of Can logo, please note that it has gone through a vetting process, and it embodies these 4 key qualities. The first one, which jumps at you when you look at the proudly South African logo, is the fact that the logo is made up of the colors of the flag of the Republic of South Africa, telling you that the product is made in South Africa and contains sufficient local content, in that even the raw materials and components that are utilized are sourced as best as possible locally and converted into the finished product within the borders of South Africa. And even in instances where we don't necessarily have the raw materials and components, we urge companies that affiliate with us, they have to bring in unfinished products, and the conversion of those components and raw materials into the final product that will go into the market must happen in South Africa. The value addition must happen within South Africa, such that jobs can be created in the process. The products that affiliate with us have to be of a high quality nature. Even if you're rendering services, your service must be rendered, as per the standard prescribed for that industry. And so the tick in the logo tells you that you can trust the product. It will meet the needs for which you are acquiring it for. Companies that affiliate with us also have to ensure that they help us preserve the environment by employing sound environmental practices, ensuring that they recycle and reuse material, they dispose of their waste responsibly, and they just help us reduce the carbon footprint. And lastly, they have to ensure that they treat their workers fairly and in compliance with the labor legislation of the country. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act prescribes the minimum that every employer has to meet, and that is what we look out for. And so companies that affiliate with us have to tick all of those 4 boxes. And when you see the logo on any product, you know that you're buying a high quality, locally made product produced by an ethical company. Entrepreneurship is important, and I touched on this, so I won't spend too much time on this, but I think the purpose of my slide was to demonstrate the fact that developed economies, which have in most instances, higher populations, but much lower unemployment rates, are thriving because their small businesses environments thrive. The small businesses represent more than 90% of economic activity in those developed economies, and we are lagging behind as part of South Africa. In fact, BBBE is critical in bringing new players in that space, and hence the partnership we have with the BBBE Commission, and Advocate Madonsela will talk to you about that. But when you look at the SMME support ecosystem, entrepreneurs have a need for various things: information. They need to be assisted in terms of how to comply with tax and statutory regulations, how to drive up productivity, how to remain compliant with various requirements. They need overall financial and non-financial support, including funding. They need to register the IP trademarks, and they need assistance with that. And where we come in as Policy of Can is we then play the role of an access to market partner. If you come in with a new product, if you come in as a new entrant, if you come in as a transformed entity, sometimes your biggest challenge is not knowing whether people will buy from you. And I did touch on this earlier. And so Policy of Can is there to help in that regard by exposing your product to those who make purchasing decisions. And these are just some of the access to market programs that we have, segmented into three main sectors, the first one being the private sector. And in so doing, we are talking to the fourth focus area. Remember, I said we have four focus areas, and the fourth one is improving accessibility of locally made products and services. And so when it comes to the private sector, what we do is we go out and we ask the private sector to commit. There's a campaign that we started a couple of years ago. We even presented commitments to the president in 2018 when he hosted his presidential job summit. And we basically, the question we were asking the private sector is, through their purchasing decisions, can they commit to job creation? And these are just some of the commitments that we've been able to attain over the years. It includes banks giving us a commitment to buy furniture, uniform, promotional material, and stationery locally, schools, especially independent and privately owned schools, giving us a commitment to buy the uniforms, furniture, reading material, and stationery within the borders of South Africa. The private hospitals, the independent hospitals, buy linen, bedding, their beds, uniform, medical equipment, pharmaceutical products locally. Automotive manufacturers have been asked to look at their components, their machinery, their uniform for their factory workers. Retailers have been asked to increase the levels of local content on their shelves, to increase shelf space for locally made products, to look at where the shop fitting equipment and material comes from, and to buy that which is locally made. Uniforms is something else that they need to buy locally. In terms of manufacturers, we are constantly asking manufacturers to buy their raw materials locally, to buy packaging material locally, such that they contribute to the base of those who will be employed and who can then be in a position to come back and buy whatever it is that they're producing. So those are just some of the examples of commitments that we actively look for as PaliSAF and commitments that we're able to attain over the years. I'm quickly going to play a video for you, but it gives you a sense as to what we have introduced into the private sector to assist buyers in the private sector. Constantly said to us, we don't know where to find reliable suppliers. So we provide a base of reliable and vetted suppliers who have gone through our vetting process and can be trusted. As a buyer, when you come across the suppliers, you know that they've gone through a vetting process, there's a rating given to them, and so you can trust that they'll deliver on time, the quality will be right, and that most importantly, you will be buying a locally made product, not products who come into the country, products that are brought into the country and labels are changed. And so the platform is called MAP, Market Access Platform. Suppliers can register themselves on the platform. We then approve those suppliers based on the vetting process, and it increases their visibility. They are seen by more buyers and more customers over and above those customers that they might have. So let me quickly play the video, and then we can continue with the presentation.
Large companies operating in South Africa recognize the long-term strategic benefit of current legislation focusing on transformation and corporates' responsibility to localize supply chains beyond philanthropic reasons and to comply with the legislation. Corporates are increasingly investing in enterprise and supply development initiatives. However, a number of challenges remain. Finding vetted manufacturers according to local content requirements at acceptable industry standard levels of quality, with the capacity to keep up with demand required from large organizations. Finding high-performing, transformed suppliers across all categories, bridging the gap between buyers' expectations and suppliers' capabilities, and suppliers' over-reliance on limited key accounts. Searching for suppliers is a key step in the procurement process. The suppliers need to meet the company's expectations regarding cost, capacity, quality, deadline, as well as performance. Introducing Market Access Platform, your preferred portal to source localized and transformed suppliers. Market Access Platform, MAP, is an online portal that influences localization and transformation. It enables corporates to refer, find, and rate vetted high-performing transformed suppliers, local service providers, and manufacturers across industries, thereby creating market access for suppliers while mitigating the risks associated with sourcing from unfamiliar companies. Buyers are able to find reliable and vetted localized and transformed suppliers, refer their high-performing transformed suppliers, local manufacturers, and service providers to MAP, thereby enabling them to grow and become more competitive. Advertise procurement opportunities. support the growth of their own high-performing suppliers, increase competitiveness in sourcing, reduce the cost of sourcing, rate services received from suppliers, view the socio-economic impact of their commercial activity with selected suppliers, and record and monitor their localization procurement commitments. Suppliers are able to increase their visibility in a cross-industry marketplace, find other suppliers to procure from, and view tenders when published. Benefits and unique selling proposition. Buyer benefits. Contribute towards a localized and transformed supply chain. Retain and create jobs. Enable the sustainability of suppliers by creating market access opportunities. And contribute to the growth of the economy by favoring local manufacturers and service providers by increasing local demand. Supplier benefits. Corporate visibility. Gauge client satisfaction. B2B opportunities, buying from other suppliers. And attend proudly South African events and be exposed to the collective National Buy Local campaign, calling on both private and public sectors, as well as consumers, to procure locally. We are therefore calling on corporate South Africa to review and secure procurement practices and give preference in all cases possible to companies that are manufacturing locally. Utilize MAP to influence localization and transformation. Refer and find high-performing suppliers. Advertise procurement opportunities. And record and monitor localization procurement commitments. Market Access Platform, your preferred portal to source localized and transformed suppliers.
And that's MAP. So basically, we go out, we look for localization commitments, we identify, we ask the private sector to identify items that they can buy locally and ring-fence those for localization purposes. We then utilize our database to identify suitable companies that can then fulfill that need from the private sector. And we ideally want these companies to be listed on MAP. The corporates themselves also register on MAP, where they then buy and transact with each other after finding each other on MAP. And remember, one of the benefits that was shown in the video is the fact that the private sector can advertise procurement opportunities that are ring-fenced for localization on MAP. And so only local producers and those who qualify will see those products. Another example is how we then work with a franchise association. We take 20 companies at a time to go and pitch to buyers and franchisors and franchisees such that they can then become possible suppliers to the franchise industry. We also have portals that we've created on our website that we list companies that produce some of these items that were required, especially in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, including medical PPE as well as non-medical PPE. And so that this becomes a focal point and a platform where buyers can easily go and find suppliers. In terms of public sector procurement, Caitlin will talk about these designated items, but the role of public sector is on the back of those items that government has designated and identified as items that they're going to buy locally. Whenever they make those purchasing decisions, when they advertise the tenders, we have a tracking system that monitors those tenders. We then identify local manufacturers in our base and we send them those tenders because they're in a position to can respond to those tenders. This way, we assist entities also to correct tenders where they've issued the tenders without a provision that prescribes that only local manufacturers or locally made products will be considered when evaluating the bids. And as a result, government then buys local. The last part of my presentation focuses on consumers, and a big portion of our efforts, a big part of our efforts going forward focuses on online and the e-commerce space. We are coming up with a lot of partnerships that will enable Proudly SA products, member products to be sold on various platforms. Some of the platforms are the ones with high traffic. The biggest selling platforms in the country, and we're going to make announcements over the next couple of weeks as we conclude those partnerships. We're also working towards building our own online store. We had a partnership that has since ended, and now what we're working on is creating a new platform, and then the process is underway to ensure that we grow the presence of Proudly SA products on online platforms. We roll out consumer education campaigns to educate consumers, like I said earlier, on the importance of buying local, and we do this through various ways, including at malls, at universities, at festivals, through consumer expos. We work with labor, which is organized labor, the unions. We run online competitions. We do consumer advertising. We do sporting events. And we have, over the last 2 years, been running a campaign known as Game Time, basically calling on South Africans to contribute to the growth of the economy by buying local. And so let me play the ad to give you a good sense of what the message has been over the last 2 years from South African. And we are in the process of coming up with a new campaign and a new ad, but it follows on that which you will see shortly.
The second half is about to begin. We need to change the scoreboard. It's time for all of us to pause and rethink the game plan in order to save the future. I call on all of us to be game changers because greatness isn't reserved only for some people. By buying local, we're choosing to create jobs and sustain the ones we have. Time and time again, South Africans have taken destiny into their own hands, creating products that the rest of the world wanted to buy. See, the world remembers about us what we sometimes forget, but it's time for change. Let's all buy local. It's game time. Zanzi.
Local is lekker.
Your everyday decisions shape our future.
And that basically sums up what our request is. Your everyday decisions, and the theme of today's webinar is your business compliant with localization? If it's not, it means your everyday decisions might not be contributing to the betterment of this country by way of economic growth, growing the tax base, and ensuring that we create much needed new job opportunities. The question that comes up often is, how much does it cost? So for those of you on the line who are not necessarily members of Policy African, it's not expensive. There's perception out there that it's an elite club and it's very expensive. It's actually reasonable for companies with turnover less than 5 million rands. All you need to pay is 500 rands per annum, renewable after 12 months. And the most that any company that affiliates with us, and these are the larger corporates with turnover of 100 million and more, they pay 100,000 rands. And if you want to become part of the campaign, please contact us, info@proudlysa.co.za. Our contact numbers are on the 011 327 7778. The easiest way is to go on to proudlysa.co.za, go to the membership tab. The forms are there, complete the forms, become a part of the campaign. Let us help you localize your value chains and help you contribute to the growth of not just your own business, but the businesses that are part of your extensive value chains. Thank you very much, Program Director. My presentation ends here. I will still be online to take questions when they do come up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mashimbie. I was trying to keep my eye on the chat box, and I see there isn't any questions or further clarity required. That gives me, it basically tells us that you were loud and clear, or maybe, our audience is still processing what you shared with them, but I would like to encourage you to, get in touch with us in case you want to know how to join over and above what Eustace has shared with us, or anything really related to the, the discussion that we are having here today. Just to remind you that we are live on Facebook and YouTube, and also on this official platform. And if you want to post anything about what we're saying today, our hashtag is buy local to create jobs. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so we're moving along with our program, and our next speaker is Ms. Catherine Matitsa, who is Director of Fleet Procurement from the DTIC, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And Catherine will be focusing on designated industries for localization. Welcome, Catherine. Always great to see you.
Good morning. Thank you, Program Director. I'm going to switch off my video. Okay. It's always a pleasure to be part of this important event. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And colleagues on call, my name is Catherine Matitsa from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, from the Industrial Competitiveness and Growth branch of the DTIC. I can see that the presentation is shared. Can we please move to slide number 3? Localization cannot be emphasized enough. It is important, colleagues. We've heard from CEO that the storyline of localization is mainly that of jobs, the much needed jobs in the country for us to sustain the little jobs that we still have and to create additional new jobs. So my mandate today is very easy. It's to take you through the local content and production policy. As government, we have created an enabling environment for business to support localization. Allow me to start by giving an overview of the department for the sake of those who haven't engaged with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. We are a national department based in Pretoria, and unfortunately we do not have regional offices. We operating from Pretoria, and the mandate of the department is to enable transformation of the South African economy through industrial development. We have policy strategies in place to carry out our mandate, and localization is one of those policies we have in place. And under localization, we have 2 procurement levers, one being local content and production policy, the one that I'll be taking you through, and the other lever is the National Industrial Participation Program. We use it where we do not have the capacity to develop capacity in the country. And government has identified public procurement as a lever for industrial development. In other words, as government, we want to leverage the public expenditure to support mainly local manufacturing of products and to mitigate some of the socio-economic challenges that we are faced with. We've heard from CEO that localization is on top of the agenda in the economic recovery and reconstruction plan. We've heard from Honorable President on many platforms emphasizing that we must increase local demand and reduce the consumption of imported products. So as part of localization strategy, government has been implementing the local content policy referred to as designation since the year 2011, in which certain products have been designated for local production and procurement by organs of state. Why government? Government is the largest buyer. We spend as government on procurement of goods and services about 500 billion rands, and that expenditure we wanted to circulate in the country to assist us with the socio-economic challenges that we are faced with. Like CEO has said, if we choose to buy products that are imported, we are creating jobs, we exporting jobs to those countries where the products are coming from. So as government, we introduced this policy, making it part of the law, of our buying law, that preference will be given to products that are manufactured here in South Africa. We know that the public procurement space is highly regulated. Therefore, when we were introducing this policy, we had to review our regulations to make provision for the promotion of locally produced product. In 2011, we amended the regulations, as we were all aware that as government, we are guided by the Public Procurement Preferential Framework Act and its regulations. So in 2011, we amended the regulations to make provision for locally produced products, for them to be given preference in our buying space as government. In other words, as government, where we have set aside those products or designated the product to be local, all organs of state are obliged to follow the rules and buy local. Next slide, please. So 2011, we amended the regulations. 2017, the regulations were amended again. And under the 2017 regulation, local content and production, it's under Regulation 8. Regulation 8.1, it gives powers to the Minister of Trade and Industry to facilitate the designation, look at sectors where we have the capacity and set them aside for local production. And for all organs of state, when they go out to stipulate the local content requirements in those bid invites. In other words, organs of state are obliged by law where the Minister of Trade and Industry has designated sectors to put the local content requirements in those RFQs, in those RFPs, when they invite tenders, when they invite quotations. They don't leave it to the suppliers to know that the particular product has been designated. So in terms of compliance, all organs of state where the Minister of Trade and Industry has announced the product to be designated and has attached the stipulated minimum threshold local content, they need to follow the rules. National Treasury, their role is to inform all organs of state via circulars that a particular product has been designated. And in those circulars, organs of state are being guided on how to go about purchasing those products. What is it that they need to include in their quotation? What is it that they need to include in their bid invites? And Regulation 8.4, it gives powers to all organs of state in a way to self-designate their quotations and their tenders. In other words, where the Minister of Trade and Industry hasn't designated a particular product, a particular sector, the organs of state in their buying are not limited to the few products that are designated by the Minister of Trade and Industry. They can extend this requirement of local content in other sectors that are not yet designated. The only condition there is that when they do so, they must work closely. There must be consultations with the DTIC in the National Treasury just for control, because in those products, they are not yet published or circulated as designated. Therefore, the DTIC will be in a position to assist the particular organ of state in terms of reasonable thresholds for local content and so forth. In terms of evaluation, the regulations are very clear to say only bids that meet the required local content should be considered during the evaluation process. So these requirements are not just purely just requirements to be there. It's requirements that are supposed to be evaluated during the evaluation process. Next slide, please. So it's part of the law. As government, we have made it a law that we will buy products that are manufactured here in South Africa. And the local content is based on local manufacturing. It's measured on the product itself. It's the level of local content in the product. It's not only about local purchasing. One can buy something that has been imported from somewhere else. That doesn't qualify to be a local content. So as government, when we were introducing this particular policy, we had to come up with a standard definition of what is local content. Reason being that we noticed that as government, when we talk local content, we talking past each other, we're referring to different things. Hence, we had to come up with a standard definition, and the local content that we are discussing today in this webinar is about the product itself being manufactured within the borders of South Africa, within the borders of RSA. And I'm very glad on the work that Proudly South African is doing, because a number of suppliers who are supplying government, they are not manufacturers themselves, but we're not excluding the suppliers, the middlemen, the entrepreneurs from the process. The only requirement is that if you are not a manufacturer yourself, where there are local content requirements, you need to source your products from a local manufacturers. Gone are the days whereby suppliers used to just source and supply government. In these new rules, you are required to go a step further and know who the manufacturer, the local manufacturers of the products that you are dealing with are, so that you can meet the requirements. So you are required to, when you meet with the local manufacturers, to ask them relevant questions in terms of the level of local content of their products for compliance purposes. Where you will see a local content requirements, it means by its nature, you must code with a product that is manufactured somewhere in South Africa, in a plant in South Africa. Don't just buy from the retailers without asking them the relevant questions, because at the end of the day, you are required to make a declaration, which is a self-declaration. But should you be successful on that particular transaction, you will be held responsible for the declaration that you have made. So I will encourage suppliers not to wait until they see these requirements in the bid documents. This is a cabinet decision. As South African, we have made a decision that this is the route we're gonna follow. We want to give preference to our own products. Therefore, go source this required information in advance, because when the tenders are out, they are out for a limited period of time. You won't be able to do the runarounds to look for information and complete the required documentation in time. So do your homework while you still have time. You know the products that you deal with, the products that you code for. In terms of furniture, we've seen the case study from CEO's presentation that we've lost jobs there. So we designated the rationale is because we want to support our local industry. In the furniture space, we do have capacity, but that capacity is not fully utilized. With the designation, we want to improve capacity utilization. On this slide, we are showing the products that are designated to date. We have on our list about 28 products. So as a supplier, you will identify the ones that you deal with and make sure that you get you identify the local manufacturers. If you are not sure who are the local manufacturers, the Proudly South African portal, the MAP system, can be of assistance to you. And then you can identify the ones that you would like to deal with, contact them, and get your schedules completed. By the time the bids goes out for you, it will be just to transfer the information into the relevant documentation. So you can see for some, they are designated as high as 100%. Where a product is designated to be 100%, we don't allow any form of importation. The manufacturers must source and or produce the products from locally made inputs and components. For some, we have designated the product to be below 100%, reason being that before we designate a particular sector, we undertake studies, we do research, and we have a template that we follow internally. And the thresholds or the local content percentages that you see here are informed by the research that was conducted prior to circulation or publication of the designation. If it's less than 100%, it's because the research showed us that some of the input materials are not available locally. Therefore, manufacturers are allowed to import those inputs for the difference, but we still expect them to do the production locally. They can import some of the raw materials, and also the assembly, excuse me, must happen locally. Next slide, please. So some of the products are still in the pipeline for designation, and those are the products that we are earmarking for designation. Under the construction yellow metal, we're looking at the number of categories, the ADTs, the TLFs, light commercial vehicles, the cars that we use as government as pool cars. We want them designated to support the companies that have invested in the country, assembling those models in the country. What we're saying as government is that locally assembled models must be given reference because they are assisting the government with job creation, absorbing people in terms of labor. Under the electrotechnical, we're looking at the fridges, the laundry machine, the ICT space, we're looking at laptops, tablets. All these are still in the pipeline. We'll be finalizing with the National Treasury. When it comes to food products, we're looking at the poultry, we're looking at sugar, we're looking at dairy products. And as the DTIC, we're also undertaking master plans, working with retailers on those, and they've made commitments that they will invest, and we want to localize as much as we can. It's not only for the private sector, it's not only for the public sector, even the private sector committed to the localization, and they are working towards maximizing localization. Next slide, please. So we have instruction notes in place, of which some of them we are amending, and we do have documents in place. Like I've alluded to the fact that, next slide please, we have a standard definition of what's local content, and also we have a standard formula for calculating local content. We didn't want to leave it to the suppliers to use their own method of calculating local content, though. So we have a standard by SABS, the national standard since 1286-2017. It's a document that guides us in terms of measurement and verification of local content. Even the formula is in that standard. So as the DTIC, we were thinking of the suppliers, and we developed a guidance document on how to calculate local content, and tried to take it a step further by creating templates, trying to simplify the formula that we use to calculate local content. National Treasury, they developed a standard bidding document called SBD 6.2 for national departments and SOCs, and MBD 6.2 for municipalities, and they also issue out instruction notes when the Minister of Trade and Industry designate a particular sector. So colleagues, you can see that as government, we're working together. It's not just one department. All of us, we're putting our heads together to maximize localization for the sake of jobs in our country. Next slide, please. So when these quotations goes out, the organs of state by law, they are obliged to indicate the local content. If you see a bid out there for any of the products that I've shared and it doesn't stipulate the local content rules, please escalate that to the DTIC. We also try our best. CEO has alluded to the fact that they do have a system that tracks these adverts. They send them to our department, and my unit is responsible for following on those adverts that are not compliant to the local content requirements, and we'll offer ourselves to assist the particular organ of state to amend their bid to comply with the local content requirements. So on the side of suppliers, I will advise you, if you are not familiar with this requirement, to get in touch with the DTIC. We're always available to assist industry. You can even now walk to our offices. We'll sit with you and take you through the process of implementing the local content. You will see these requirements in the SBD 6.2. The organ of state, all organs of state are supposed to implement the local content. In their SBD 6.2, they will list the products that require to be local content, and next to each and every product, they will indicate the level of local content in terms of percentage. For example, if it's protective clothing, they will indicate the 100%, because textile clothing, leather, and footwear is designated at 100%. If it's an RFQ for cables, they will indicate that all the electrical cables must be 90% local content. When you are responding to those requirements, you will complete the very same SBD 6.2 and the associated annexures with Annexure C, Annexure D, and Annexure E. And when the bid closes, you are expected to submit, these are returnables, you submit this documentation, and the organ of state, during the evaluation of the tender, they will first consider the local content, whether they will check if you meet the local content or not. It's a compliance matter, it's a mandatory requirement. So if you don't return back the SBD, MBD 6.2 and the relevant annexures, your bid is not going to be considered. It's not just one of those forms. It's important in terms of local content, in terms of localization. If you don't know how to do it, I would like to invite you to get in touch with the DTIC. We'll share the contact details with Proudly SA, or we can even include a slide with the contact details. We want you to comply fully. This is just an administrative requirement. I don't think companies should really fail on this. What you are required to do is to source your products from a local manufacturer who's compliant. And if you don't know who is compliant, Proudly South African, they are offering their system to assist you to comply fully. Next slide, please. This is the formula that we use for local content. Next slide. We've also made provision for exemption requirements. We've noticed that due to the specifications, because specification in governments are not standardized, you find other organs of state over specify instead of focusing their specification on functionality. They will call for things that at times you find that the local industry are not in a position to meet those requirements. Where as the DTIC, we are not able to influence the specification, we say bidders can approach the DTIC if they are not in a position to meet the required minimum threshold local content. And at times it might be because of shortage of raw materials or non-availability of raw materials. If the manufacturers, the local manufacturers are not in a position to meet the required local content percentages due to various reasons, the bidders can approach the DTIC to request letters of exemption while the tender is still open prior to closing, so that if the exemption is granted, they will attach that exemption to their bid response and submit it at the closing of the tender. Next slide, please. Next slide. Still on exemption, and the slide, it shows bidders on what is it that they need to put in their letter of exemption request. This exemption process, we do have it on our website, so the bidders can access that. And if you need more information with regard to how to go about requesting an exemption from the DTIC, you can contact us. We will provide you with that information. The following slides is just a snapshot of the declaration document. I'm not going to waste time on this. And for those that are interested, you can liaise with the DTIC. We'll take you through those documentation. We work closely with SABS. We've appointed them to be our local content verification agent. Over and above certifying the products, they also have a local content verification office. Reason being that there's also verification involved after or post-award. So the declarations that are made at the time of bidding, the requirement on the side of organs of state is that they need to report back to the DTIC for verification purposes. So they will provide the DTI with the copies of the declaration that you would have made at the time of bidding if you are successful in that particular tender. As the DTIC will share that information with SABS, and on a yearly basis, the SABS prioritize the tenders and quotations that they will go out to verify. There is verification involved. So the information that you put as part of the declaration, it's not just for the sake of compliance. Make sure that all that you put there is authentic, because according to the SBD 6.2, the declaration form, if you read it thoroughly, you also make a commitment that to your knowledge, the information that you have put there, it's being verified and there isn't any misrepresentation. And you also commit that should there be misrepresentation found after award, the organ of state can implement the remedies to deal with that non-compliance. And as the regulations are, remedies in terms of non-compliance, you will be blacklisted, the tender will be cancelled, the organ of state can recover cost. So I don't think companies, you want to put your company at risk. So make sure that whatever information that you declare in terms of local content, it's verified. You are sure that you are sourcing from a local manufacturer who's compliant to the local content requirements. Next slide, please. This is a section from the regulation that talks to the non-compliance. I've just summarized what it's all about. And these documents can be accessed. Some of them are on the DTIC website and some of them are on the National Treasury website. Suppliers can familiarize themselves with the content of the instruction notes or circulars. That information you can access from the National Treasury website, and on this presentation or on the slides we have provided a link, so you're welcome to visit our website and get more information with regard to local content requirements, and visit the National Treasury website as the custodian of public procurement and get those forms and the circulars of designated products. I've come to the end of my presentation, and Makumele, thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Much appreciated. You know, your invaluable contribution is always so well received. And I do see that on the chat platform, there is a on the questions and answers, right, there's a question for you, and I'd rather we take it now. It is from Difference Lubisi. What does the DTIC do to assist developing small companies with funding to accelerate their production? Please go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a number of incentives as government. Some of them are sitting with the DTIC and some of them are sitting with our sister department, the Department of Small Business and Development. We can take it offline, provide the details in terms of the various incentives that are available. It differs from one sector to the other, and some of them are sitting with relevant departments, like those that are into farming, those that are into agro processing. Those incentives are sitting with the Department of Agriculture. So it's also, we also have within the DTIC sector, especially within the branch that I'm coming from, they also have a number of instruments. Not all the instruments are in are financial instruments. Some are in the form of non-financial, but then there is support from government side. There is support from government side, and we can get the colleagues information with regard to the different financial instruments that are in place. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Happy, you are muted.
Oh, geez, thank you so much. Thank you, much appreciated. I was just saying quickly that there is quite a number of colleagues who have asked if we can share your slides, Catherine, and I do know that on your presentation, there is your contact email address details. So I'm going to encourage Difference to contact you, because you did say in your response that you are happy to take this offline. And for those of you who are asking for the presentations, we'll make that available. And just to also quickly ask you, Catherine, before we let you go, is that there's Raleigh Zuma would like to know, we are local manufacturer of protective clothing and we buy local materials locally. I think that's what it says. How do we register as a local manufacturer and be part of the DTIC database? Catherine?
Thanks for that question. colleagues, the DTIC doesn't keep any database. If you want to register as a local manufacturer, I think you should take that up with Proudly South African, since they have a portal for this. As the DTIC, we are not allowed to keep any database in terms of who's who out there. But our institution, Proudly South African, I know that they have different portals for different sectors. I think you can keep it there. We don't want to discriminate between suppliers. We don't want to show any form of favoritism to one and not the other. It's not a requirement on our side to keep a database. So we don't have such a database, but I will encourage suppliers, manufacturers to register with Proudly South African. Thank you, because we also get asked by different bidders, especially those who do not know where to source compliant products. So we always refer them to industry association. We always refer them to Proudly South African. I will encourage that company to liaise with Proudly South African. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I'm going to request that Mr. Mashimbie come back online. There is a question for Proudly South African, and maybe you can also just touch on what Catherine has just said. But specifically for us, Ms. Chwa Madondo says, what does Proudly South African use to support localization claims made for products listed on the map? You may have a different understanding of what claim is supposed to mean. Please, can you go ahead, Eustace? Thank you.
So as Proudly South African, what we do is we rely on partnerships, interestingly, from people like Mesetra, from SABS, where they have a local content verification scheme. And over and above us doing desktop research, where we rely on documentation submitted by the companies, and we then do an assessment where there's a need to verify that third-party self-declaration. We then ask SABS to assist with confirmation, so they're able to do local content verification. So you can go to them as an entrepreneur who's logged online, and if you want to ensure that when you bid for opportunities in the public sector and in the private sector, where they want to know with absolute certainty that what you are declaring yourself has been verified by someone else, you can go to the SABS. That scheme will then give you results that indicate at which level you are. So if you have 10% local content, it will be at level 1. If you have 100% local content, it will be at level 10. So the SABS is a strategic partner of Proudly South African, and we utilize them for that purpose. But for purpose of membership, where companies indicate that they don't necessarily want to do the local content verification, they want to self-declare, we do an assessment on a desktop basis, but in the main, reliance is on partners like SABS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eustace. Thank you so much, everybody, for the questions that you've put on the questions and answer platform. I encourage you to keep them coming. Also, just to find out from the team if we have nothing on Facebook, and we will take that as we go along. But our next speaker now, who is going to focus on influencing policy and legislative development for an enabling environment for inclusive growth and employment, is our partner and stakeholder, Mr. Virgilio Damolo, who is Project Manager, Localization, BUSA. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We look forward to hearing from you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just trying to share my screen and to check if the slides are on full screen. Hope you can see them. My name is Virgilio, and I'm a management consultant by profession. and I started supporting BUSA as project manager for localization last November, so it's just a bit less than a year now. And I would like, first of all, to thank Proudly SA for organizing this webinar and giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences. I think Eustace, in his introduction, he explained very, very well why localization is really important for the country, the multiplier effect, the job creation aspects. I think we've heard from Catherine how localization is the core of government policy. So from my side, I want to reiterate why it is important, and I'll have a focus on what I learned in these 10 months of work on localization, and hopefully some of these lessons will be useful for the way forward. In terms of context, first of all, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, really we hear many definitions of localization. At times we talk only about import substitution, but at the end of the day, our view is that really the objective of localization is to increase local manufacturing, local production capacity, increasing industrial output basically, and of course creating jobs in the process. So it can result in import substitution, but doesn't necessarily need to be at all cost import substitution. It can also be new products. And BUSA has been working actively with government on this. I would say all business associations in South Africa have been working pretty much on the topic of localization. BUSA, as the apex organization, has a bit coordinated efforts across the private sector. And you might be aware, I think it was in early 2021, as after the COVID pandemic and as part of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, there were discussions at NEDLAC about commitments to localization and an overall target set of reducing non-oil imports by 20% across a large number of sectors. And some private sector champions had been identified, and there was basically a commitment to move forward. And so when I started basically supporting BUSA last November, I picked up a bit from that work, and I realized that those 42 sectors maybe were not so homogeneous or consistent as somebody would have liked. And definitely it was also a bit too much for us to try to deal with. So we agreed to prioritize those sectors. And out of that prioritization exercise, basically, we identified 3 key sectors, which are the health sector, the steel sector, and the renewable energy sector. And we looked at some criteria, mainly the potential, the feasibility to have some impact on those sectors, also looking at the activity going on. So I've been focusing a lot on supporting the master plan processes on those sectors up to now. And as I mentioned, really the core, the focus of my presentation, the objective is really to share what I found during this time when I've worked on the topic. And I think the first finding is quite important, because we are trying lots of these localization initiatives really to drive them at sector level and not at the individual company level. There's lots of work happening at individual company level, but that is typically driven by the companies themselves. As an organization, we try to work more at sectorial level, and clearly it's easier in more consolidated industries because there's less players to deal with. Typically the industry is better structured, clear tiers of suppliers. So an example is automotive industry, which is broadly considered as the best example of successful localization in South Africa. Few OEMs with very strong ties with with first-year suppliers, and then a cascade down to lower levels. One topic which is very, very important is that collaboration across the value chain is really critical. And when we talk across the value chain, as Justus showed, it also includes adjacent sectors, input sectors, like for example, steel or plastics, which are inputs into many products. And those discussions require sharing information, data. So it's critical to have meaningful conversations between supply and demand. Is a critical aspect to make it work. And this is where the next point comes in, where at times, unfortunately, current competition laws and regulations create some challenges to proper interaction. In some cases, like for example, during COVID, for the interest of the country, for PPE and other first necessity, they were relaxed a lot. I think also in the state we are as a country, it would make sense to relax a bit competition rules, allow really demand and supply to come together in the room and share information, data, what the plans are, to be able to really plan for the investments that are required for successful localization. Setting up factories is a long-term exercise. It's time-consuming, very expensive, so requires proper planning and proper visibility of demand. Another point, maybe at times there's a bit too much focus on protection versus competitiveness. We heard about the designation process of DTIC. Definitely it helps, and protection can help in many instances, especially startups, infant industries, where they need protection for a few years before really becoming competitive. But I think also we need probably a vision of localization that focuses on really being competitive, being open to market forces, but try to focus localization on where South African companies can really be efficient, productive, and ultimately competitive. So there's definitely sectors where South Africa can have a comparative advantage, lots of raw materials that are very precious, and not only in terms of mining, but I understand some agricultural products. So looking at where really we have some advantages is a key aspect. And then I think also when we talk about targets for local content, it's important to put things into perspective. Not everything is localizable. Certain things we might be able to achieve 100%. In other aspects, we might be able to achieve almost nothing, and we need to be cognizant of that. Automotive sectors, as I mentioned, very good example of successful localization, but current average is still around 40% in terms of local content. Lots of components like very sophisticated telematics equipment, all that is still fully imported and will probably be so for the next years, but still it's a sector where lots of progress has been made. And then maybe just to repeat, demand, reliable demand is key to make localization happen. So all the efforts from Proudly South Africa to engage the demand side are critical, because really you can set up a perfect factory, but if there's no market, no demand, it won't have a great success. Some lessons learned from the automotive sector. As I mentioned, quite a good success story. We looked at it together to learn something. I think the first point really comes a bit to the topic of today, which is about policy, about compliance, and is the long-term policy certainty. Local content support for the automotive sector started in 1961. I wasn't born yet, so I don't know how many of the people in this webinar were already born, but comes a long way. As I mentioned earlier, ongoing and frequent constructive collaboration between the various manufacturers, the various tiers of manufacturing, but also if there's a demand side, of course, automotive is different, is facing consumer and not really B2B with customers, but still there should be the opportunity to collaborate between demand and supply. The programs should be relatively open to market forces and really, as I mentioned, try to drive competitiveness. That's the key to make localization stick. The programs, if they're properly designed, they can become self-funding, and then they're easy to defend, easy to explain why they are in place. The automotive sector apparently is delivering lots of benefits in terms of GDP growth, in terms of input from other industries. And then even in a well-designed program, there's always need to do tweakings, refining. So for example, the focus in the automotive sector over some time shifted towards the export market. And also there was a decision to try to improve economies of scale, reduce the product ranges, so concentrating on really a few specific ranges and then being able to export those, which means that some ranges will be imported, but at least South Africa is competitive where it's manufacturing its products. And then the objectives, targets, the ongoing monitoring that is going on in the automotive sector is clearly assisting a lot, as well as the tweaking, and I said, continuously monitoring and tweaking also of incentive mechanisms to make them address what are the issues, what are the emerging trends, what are the challenges. There was also some study which showed how localization in the automotive sector, mainly due to the industry structure, was benefiting mainly the large global multinationals. So steps have also been taken to address that problem. Is now being addressed through the automotive industry transformation program and the fund. And so is really trying now, the focus is in increasing input from local lower tier manufacturers, which is where really then the benefits of the programs will be felt. And then I won't spend too much time on this slide. I think we're also a bit short of time overall for the webinar as a whole, but as I mentioned, it's been a long journey for the automotive sector, mainly to mention the various programs, the various policies really created certainty long term, so somebody can feel the commitment is there and can be incentivized really to invest, to put effort, knowing that this is not something that will go away soon, is something that is here to stay. I can make my commitments, I can make my investments. And then, as I said, keeping on adapting also to global markets, because that is key. And again, I repeat, the demand side is critical, and the communication, the collaboration between supply and demand as much as possible to make localization work. And I think this is my last slide, so I'm happy to take any questions at this stage.
Thank you so much, Virgilio. Your presentation is much appreciated. Thank you. I just want to see if there is a question for you from the audience. Not necessarily. I think the common thread is that many of the attendees would like access to the presentations for today. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Really much appreciated, Virgilio. And we then, move on with our program, and would like to warmly welcome Advocate Lindiwe Madonsela, Senior Manager BBBE, and her focus this morning is going to be on codes and benefit and the awareness needed to promote access to finance and markets, competitiveness and localization, amongst other critical things that entrepreneurs need to know about. Always a pleasure to see you, Ms. Madonsela, and welcome this morning. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you very much. And let me take this opportunity to thank Proudly South African for inviting the BBBEE Commission to participate again in this very important topic. As I've already been introduced, it's Lindo Madonsela with the BBBEE Commission. And the BBBEE Commission is an entity of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And we exist to monitor the implementation of the broad-based Black economic empowerment to ensure that the codes of good practice that have been issued by the minister are implemented properly by the various sectors in making sure that we do drive the transformation in the South African economy. Now, when we look at this important topic around localization, from the aspect of BBBEE, we see it as a very important program of government, and its importance is notable from the benefits that one will be able to achieve through an effective drive of localization. And then firstly, that will make sure that we do achieve improved labor markets, and then we do increase access to market and reduce barriers of entry in various markets of the sectors of the economy. And then also we'll be able then to also realize competitiveness where we're able to break the monopoly structural characteristics of the South African economy, which can be identified in some of the sectors. Now, how then does this program around localization become important from the aspects of BBBEE? It becomes important in a sense that it addresses the very same challenges that the BBBEE legislation seeks to address. Firstly, it deals with issues around making sure that we promote the sustainable growth of Black-owned businesses, and then also looks at expanding the capabilities of local industries. Now, the BBBEE legislation, through the various components, does also speak to this particular aspect, particularly when we look closely at the element around enterprise and supplier development. Because through this particular element, the BEE legislation is able to drive localization. At the same time, it is able to drive the transformation of the value chains, which we have seen over a number of years. It has been a very big challenge for some of the businesses. And then at the same time, in the BEE legislation, through this ESD element, it is able to provide market access opportunities because there's a particular manner in which procuring entities, both in the public sector and in the private sector, need to make sure that they disperse of their procurement spend so that they can also be able to create those particular market access opportunities. Now then, how then do we say that the BBBEE legislation is going to influence the localization? Please permit me to zoom in into three aspects. Now, there is an aspect around the relationship that exists with preferential procurement, and we'll talk about how under those particular aspects, what is it that can be done? And there is an aspect that talks to issues around access to funding, which talks to now how do we create or channel investment to make sure that we support the creation of local capabilities. And then there's also a third aspect that we can draw benefit from, and that is the aspect or the opportunity that is made available by funds that are contributed by multinationals under the equity equivalent investment program, particularly looking at the aspect around enterprise development. Now, when you look at the first aspect around preferential procurement seeks to stimulate and expand local capabilities. Now, it talks now to say this is how we need to direct our various economic procurement activities. Now, when you look at the procurement spend, large part of it, which is 50% of the spend, must be directed to entities that are at least 51% Black-owned. And then at the same time, when you look at who are the beneficiaries of entities that have to access the funds that are available for enterprise and supply development, it will be the same entities. Now, the issue around preferential procurement, this is the issue, is that firstly, the preferential procurement element covers three aspects that we believe can influence localization. The first aspect is the aspect around designation, and my colleague Catherine has covered that. And the linkage again with that, with the BBBE codes, is that where sectors are designated, exporting of components or exporting of services in those aspects will also not be permissible. So even from a perspective of BBBE, entities are encouraged then to make sure that they align to the designation program when they are looking and strategizing around how they're going to effectively implement their preferential procurement spends. And this is both for the public sector as well as the private sector, because even the public sector is supposed to be implementing the BBBE legislation, and they do have their own scorecard referred to as the specialized scorecard that also guides in terms of how they can also be able to drive localization through preferential procurement. Then also on the aspect of preferential procurement, the second aspect that we can utilize to drive localization is the issue around the treatment of imports. Now, the BE legislation recognizes two categories of imports. There are imports based on the fact that there is no local capabilities, and then also there are imports because there will be further value addition that will happen locally. The BE legislation is saying, with regard to that category of imports, you can continue to import as an entity, and then there's a manner in which you'll be able to recognize your BBBE spend. And then secondly, there's a category of imports, and these imports are based on the fact that it is different to the brand specification, or the brand that you are importing is different to the brand that exists locally, or the technical specification of the components or products that you are importing are different to the technical specification of the products that exist locally. Then the BE legislation has said, well and good, we notice that, but we cannot then allow entities to continue to import. Then the legislation says, with that category 2 of imports, you will have to create what we call an import substitution plan. In this import substitution plan, that is where you are going to localize some of the components that are being imported, or some or part of the products that are being imported. Now, the legislation has outlined that there has to be a plan that will outline how exactly what is going to happen for localization to happen. Now, however, the challenge that we have noted with regard to that is that there is no specific method of verification that has been outlined to assess the verification process to validate that indeed those plans that entities have set up are actually being implemented. And looking at the fact that these requirements around having import substitution plans, it came in 2015 when the codes were being amended. Now, looking at 2015 to where we are now, we should be seeing some form of high activities around localization, but we are not able to see that because we believe that part of that could be the reason around the fact that the verification part has not yet been strengthened. And policy would assist a lot in making sure that that verification process is actually strengthened so that the plans do not just sit idle, but we can be able to monitor movement around it. And then the third part around preferential procurement that can assist from a BBBE perspective to drive localization is the issue around what we call empowering supplier. Now, when we look at how the procurement scorecard within the enterprise and supply development element has been structured, it says that both the public sector and the private sector, when they conduct their procurement activities, they need to procure from entities that are empowering suppliers. Now, there is a strict requirement for one to comply as an empowering supplier. The only category of entities that automatically qualifies as empowering supplier is small-sized entities. And these would be entities with an annual revenue of 10 million and less. But the rest of the entities has to comply with at least some of these aspects. Now, the empowering supplier aspect will assist to drive localization, because looking at that, it looks at issues around 25% of cost of sales must be generated locally. It looks at aspect around 25% of beneficiation, where beneficiation is required, must happen locally. It looks at aspect around the training that needs to be provided to small and medium-sized entities. Now, why is it that we have not seen movement around this particular aspect? Is that when the legislation was amended and this particular requirement was introduced, particularly to drive localization, the state of the economy at the time created a challenge for some of the entities to actually deem themselves as empowering supplier. And then a moratorium was placed through the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition that now all entities automatically will be considered empowering supplier. But we believe from the regulatory point of view that where we are currently, linked with the industrial development plan, linked with the establishment or the revamping of the industrial as well as the special economic zones park, particularly looking at the industrialization and localization activities, together with the various master plans for the certain industries that the Department of DTIC has identified, it makes sense now for the lifting of that moratorium so that we can be focused or we can be deliberate around setting localization targets using the scorecard that is made available under the BBB legislation. And that requires further policy engagement. And this is one of the areas that, as the BBB Commission, together with Proudly South African, we've been working closely with the policymakers within the DTIC to try and look at how we can use some of these opportunities that are presented by the BBB legislation to unlock localization activities. So that is another component, or the first component, that can assist to drive localization through the preferential procurement pillar. Now, the second component that the B legislation makes available, it is the funding aspects that are located under the enterprise and supply development element. You've got the aspect that focuses on supply development, and you've got the aspect that looks at enterprise development. Now, there is a difference, and the difference is that when we talk about supply development, it talks about those supplier or those entities that will exist on the databases of the measured entities. And in this case, it could be a private sector entity, or it could be an organ of state or public entity. Then you need to identify those that are at least 51% Black owned. And the legislation is saying on an annual basis, there has to be 2% of net profit after tax that is directed to capacitate these 51% Black owned entities, small and medium sized. And the capacity that needs to happen, it is the capacity that will assist them to close the gaps that are affecting them to actually perform at the rate that they are supposed to be performing. Now, this is the spend that you can use to make sure that we build up further local capabilities and we strengthen the localization program. However, what will be required is the close and proper monitoring of those particular activities, because one thing that we have noted as the regulator is that sometimes entities will blur the line between what is preferential procurement and what is supply development. In a sense that if they've given a market access opportunity to an entity, automatically they would be assumed that they have done some form of supply development. Now, the legislation is saying with regard to supply development, it doesn't matter whether an active procurement contract exists or not. As long as you've identified an at least 51% Black-owned exempted micro-enterprise or qualifying small enterprise, you need to identify the gaps within that particular beneficiary entity and start to have a strategic implementation of programs that are going to assist that entity to address the gaps that exist. And then secondly, when we talk about the aspect around enterprise development, it is a way in which we are increasing investment to support Black-owned entities. And entities will have to identify Black-owned entities outside their supplier database. And then also there, they'll have to do and spend 1% of net profit after tax. Now, when it comes to the public sector, for supply development, the public sector will have to spend 0.2% of the allocated budget for those that are not profit driven. And for enterprise development, they'll have to spend 0.1% of their allocated budget. And this will be on an annual basis. And the legislation does recognize some form of long-term projects to make sure that this is not a tick box exercise, but we are able to produce sustainable entities who are able to produce locally made products. Now, as the Commission, one thing that we have noted is that entities on an annual basis, they're not effectively spending amounts of money that are available for supply development and enterprise development. With the national status report that we released 2 weeks ago, we noted that from the 2021 information, entities were only able to spend about 61% of the spend that is available for both enterprise development and supply development. And then to assist or to determine exactly what are the challenges, as the BBBE Commission, we've embarked on a survey to determine how effectively these monies can be spent. Now, these results of these surveys, we'll be releasing them in the later week so that we can be able to have a strategic way forward to make sure that we implement these funds, because these funds make available an opportunity to unlock opportunities around driving localization. And then what we also noticed is that there is a lot of money that is available. For 2021 only, 26 billion was available under enterprise and supply development. And this is money that is available both from the reports that we received from entities that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and then also from organs of state as well as public entities. Now, the one recommendation that as the BBBE Commission that we are making is that because we have seen some of the challenges that measured entities encounter when they have to effectively implement this fund, is that where we are now, we probably have to think of a central repository pool wherein all these funds can be pulled into and then can also be managed by the public sector or within government. And there could be a proper linkage with the various beneficiary entities. And these beneficiary entities can be identified through various platforms. They can be identified through the channels that are made available by Proudly South African. They can also be identified through the channels that are made available by the Department of Small Business and Development, including the Small Development Enterprise Agency. So there's an opportunity to align the various programs to make sure that we make funds available for driving localization. And then the third part, which is the part around equity equivalent investment program. Now, as one of the elements around driving the transformation of the South African economy, it is the element around ownership. Now, there are certain multinational entities that have indicated that they will not be able to dilute their ownership outside their home countries. Now, the BBBE legislation then has come up with a program for those particular multinationals who would have applied specifically to participate on this equity equivalent investment program, and they would have obtained approval from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Now, part of them, what they have to do is that they either need to spend 4% of their annual revenue from the South African operations, or they can spend 25% of the value of the South African operation for a particular period of time. And that period will depend in terms of how much their contribution translates in rand value. And the maximum number of years they can be on that program is 10 years. Now, whilst they're on that program, they can identify initiatives that they can implement. And one of those initiatives is enterprise development. Other initiatives will talk to skills development, and some will talk to research and development, and others will talk to the support of Black industrialists. Then we believe that through these two components, enterprise development and the support of Black industrialists, is another way in which support can be pulled for driving localization. Because what happens is that the multinationals will then identify this pool, and they also have to identify entities that can participate or gain access to those funds. Then we believe that part of the equity equivalent investment program through the DTIC can then be used to make sure that we give preference or an advantage to those entities that are going to make sure that through those particular programs around supporting Black industrialists as well as enterprise development, they drive localization. So while you have seen that from a number of years, over 8 billion of rand to date has been made available by the equity equivalent investment program. And some of these programs, we have seen them being directed to some of the special economic zones. Some are in the Seshego one, and some is in the Makhado. And we have seen that together, some of these programs have made available in terms of job creation over 2,000 jobs. Now, this, I think, lines up together with some of the benefits that localization actually makes available to the South African economy. Now, in closing, as part of the recommendation that as the BBU Commission, we think is critical is that we need through the scorecard to incentivize entities that deliberately make sure that they procure from locally manufactured products or components. And this can be introduced in terms of how the scorecard is structured. There could be incentive that is given to entities that will make sure that they do that, so that we create that competitive edge. And then we create, or we make sure that we encourage entities to buy locally manufactured products. And then secondly, we believe that through this program, there has to be a concerted effort or collaborative effort between the private sector as well as the public sector in terms of how this is going to be implemented, so that we don't see these other programs that government is driving, such as master plans and the designation program, creating monopolies, but we can be able to link up those programs to what is made available within the BBB legislation, so that we can be able to effectively drive localization. Now, what then will be the role of the BBB Commission with all of this? The role of the BBB Commission would be to monitor that what is set out in terms of the BBB, together with some of the recommendations that we have made in terms of strengthening localization and expanding opportunities in form of market access for Black-owned entities and to build their sustainable nature, is to ensure that some of these programs can be submitted to the Commission for an advisory opinion for those entities that are still conceptualizing. And for those that are already at an implementation stage, it will be to closely monitor them so that we can make sure that we do derive the benefit that these programs, together with the BBB legislation, are making available. Let me pause at this program that time to also take this opportunity to thank Proudly SA for again inviting the BBB Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Madonsela, and thank you for, when we do invite you, always really showing up and giving it your all, and being keen to impart knowledge and share with us, with our audience rather, pertinent information on the work that you do and how we are then interlinked as the two entities. I just want to browse through the chat box or the questions and answers section, and I see there's nothing directed to you for you to tackle, meaning that you did a great job, just like everybody else actually, you who do get questions anyway. But I was hoping that one or two people would want to engage you further. Thank you so much. Just to double check that there is a request for you as well to share your presentation with some of the attendees. If that would be great, if you could allow us to do that.
Okay. No, that's
thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. Well, we are right on time. We're doing well on time. The time is 11:50 now, which is when we're supposed to be doing the vote of thanks. Thank you so much to everybody that joined us this morning from, on all platforms, the Zoom platform, which is the official one, as well as the Facebook platform as well. I've just double checked with the PR team. There isn't any pressing issues on the Facebook or YouTube platform. Thank you so much. And I do recognize all of you who have sent in your email addresses requesting that we share the presentation with you. We will do that. Our back office team will definitely be in contact with you. Johanna Mdluli, I just want to read your comment quickly, talking to Ms. Madonsela. Thank you for such an informative presentation. Please share your contacts. So we will do that for you, Johanna, at least Ms. Madonsela's email address. Thank you, everybody. May I please request, with that said, request that the speakers come back online. I do see that Catherine has requested to be excused to jump onto another commitment she has. And CEO, may I please request that you do the vote of thanks? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. Just to quickly thank everyone who logged in today. The questions on the chat box have been responded to, I think, quite adequately. Firstly, to Catherine, I know she had to leave, but always very supportive and always available to assist whenever we need assistance. Virgilio, who I do a lot of work in the localization with. So thank you very much, Virgilio. We appreciate it. See you at the next localization meeting. To Lindiwe, thank you very much, Lindiwe. We go back a long way. I know the struggle continues between us, yourselves, and in our efforts to try and get the DTIC to effect all of those changes that you mentioned, including the empowering supplier element that we continue to fight with them about. So thank you very much. Let's keep going. I appreciate you making time this morning. To our program director, Happy Makumalo, thank you very much for again steering the ship and for leading the proceedings this morning. Really appreciate it. And to the Proudly SA team that helped put this together. I think this is a very important conversation. I hope we have made a difference. We have helped a lot of entrepreneurs who needed to know where to go, who needed to know what information is out there, who needed to get a sense of how to support this localization drive. This is just one of the ways in which we avail information to our members as well as non-members who are looking to drive localization. So thank you very much for tuning in. We are able to give you 8 minutes of your time back because we finished 8 minutes ahead of time. So thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Signor.
very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.